Welcome back to Behavioral Science for Brands, a podcast where we bridge the gap between academics and marketing. Every week, Richard and I sit down and go deep behind the science of some of America's most successful brands. I'm Michael Aaron Flicker.
And I'm Richard Shotton.
And today we're diving deep on the behavioral science powering Oatly, part of America's growing trend of non-dairy milk alternatives. Let's get into it. So, Richard, this is not the first time you and I have sat down and talked milk before. Back in episode 22, we covered the very famous Got Milk campaign, and we looked at some of the behavioral science that the milk industry has used to turn perception and buying around milk. And Oatly is maybe what we could say this generation's effort at introducing non-dairy milk alternatives to the market. And this has really become quite big business. Plant-based dairy alternatives are now big business in America. They account for 15% of all retail milk sales. And Oatly, the brand we're going to narrow in on today, launched in 2016 in America. By 2020, they went public at $421 million in revenue. And as of their last filing at the end of 2024, they had almost doubled their revenue to $825 million a year. So this is almost $1 billion brand, and really a very interesting marketing case study, very interesting sector of this industry, and of course, some really cool behavioral science that we'll dive into to talk about. So let's start with the brand, a little bit of the background for those that may not be as familiar with the Oatly brand, and then we'll talk about some behavioral science that we were talking about powering it. Founded in 1994 by two brothers, Rickert and Bjorn Ost, they were researching an alternative to cow's milk for people who were lactose intolerant. Their now CEO, Tony Peterson, famously said, "Our founders just figured the majority of the world's population is intolerant to milk. Why don't we make something that's designed for human beings and not for baby cows?" I mean, it's got the brand attitude already showing. So when Tony Peterson comes in as CEO, he's asking himself, how can we take advantage of this growing plant-based milk alternative movement that's taking hold across the world, but particularly in America? So he sets his focus on rebranding Oatly to introduce to the American market. So we're going to look at two things. One, some serious rebrand that he does to the packaging, and two, the way he introduces it to the American market. In the show notes, we'll drop some pictures of the old packaging and branding compared to the new that they launched with in 2016. And what's really interesting is he removes the Swedish language from the label. He makes the Oatly logo meaningfully bigger, but then he really starts to change the ethos behind the brand. As part of his launch in America, he commissions an environmental study, and then he puts the findings all over the launch material. On average, a liter of Oatly product consumed in place of cow's milk results in 80% less greenhouse emissions, 79% less land usage, and 60% less energy consumption. And compared to almond milk, it's a sixth of the water to grow a pound of oats compared to a pound of almonds. So he's got this idea that he can take on the industry and really make Oatly a alternative to milk based on the merits of the environmental impact. Mm-hmm. But the brilliance, as you'll see in the packaging design, is he really breaks category conventions by using lines like "it's like milk but made for humans," or "hey, food industry, show us the numbers." And if you look at the packaging, he uses almost like a newspaper-like treatment. On the label, he says, "We made this product look like a newspaper so you would take it more seriously." There's really a lot going on in the packaging that makes it stand out on the shelf, which we'll talk about. And then number two, as he launches in America, he knows that there's going to be a challenge to get U.S. consumers to try a non-dairy based milk. So he sets his sight on launching specifically with high-end coffee shops here in New York City and convincing local baristas that they can recommend oat milk to customers rather than cow's milk. But as is often the case with marketing, he had to change the product in order to make the promise true. So in 2017, Oatly releases their Barista Edition. And the Barista Edition has 3% milk fat versus 1.5%, so it froths more. It has a more neutral taste, so it tastes less like oat milk. And it works well in both hot and cold beverages. And so he releases a product that really is designed to meet the barista industry, and it hits a lot of success. We'll talk more about that. But pulling numbers today, in the third quarter of 2024, Oatly reported that 38% of its total revenue came from food service channels. That would include coffee shops and cafes, just showing how much that original strategy of launching with baristas and coffee shops still carries through to the brand's $825 million in revenue success today. So a lot going on here in the lead up to understanding Oatly. Richard, we looked at this, as we often do, as what can we learn about the behavioral science powering this brand? And we saw some really interesting things.
Yeah, there's a couple of big things going on here. I think firstly, their distinctiveness. When you talked about how they smashed category conventions with this, real attitude that they have. But we've talked about the von Restorff effect quite a few times. And I think, there's a great episode on liquid death that covers that. So the von Restorff effect being this idea that if you behave distinctively like Oatly do, then you're much more likely to be noticed. So that's a really interesting strand that they've been undertaking, but one we've covered before. The other area that I think is super interesting, we've never really discussed, is this idea of getting recommendations from third parties. They're launching or getting people's first experience being in a high-end barista coffee shop and getting the baristas to say how amazing this product is. Now that definitely taps into some behavioral science tactics. So the experiment and idea that most relates to the third-party recommendation is an idea called the messenger effect. And it's the idea that who says something can be important as what is said. Original study goes back to 1951. A pair of Yale psychologists called Hovland and Weiss. And for their experiment, they go up to 223 people and they ask their opinion on a topical matter. So it was 1951. One of those topical matters was, do you think an atomic-powered submarine can be built in the next year? And the people said yes or no. The psychologists then invite them back to their lab in 5 days' time. And when the participants go to the lab, they are shown a really tightly argued A4 piece of paper that says why they are wrong. So if someone said, yes, a nuclear-powered submarine can be built, there would be a really cogent, powerful argument as to why that was just impossible. The psychologists then ask people to say whether they've changed their mind. The twist in the experiment is sometimes that argument that they've read, sometimes it's positioned as coming from a credible source, like an expert source, like Robert Oppenheimer. Other times it's positioned as coming from a low credibility source, such as Pravda, the Russian newspaper. Hovland and Weiss find that has a marked effect on the persuasive power of the argument. So if the argument comes from a low credibility source, 7% of people change their mind. If it's come from a high credibility source, it's 23% changing their mind. Wow. So you've got this massive 3.5-fold difference in persuasive power. And remember, everyone is seeing exactly the same logical argument. Everyone's seeing the same fact. All that's changing is supposedly who that argument comes from. So they call this the messenger effect. And it's this idea that who communicates a message can often be as powerful as the content and the logic of the argument itself.
It strikes me that that's a lot of marketing understands this kind of naturally, and that's why there's key opinion leader marketing. That's why celebrity endorsements can carry a lot of weight. Shaquille O'Neal can go from one category to the next, and whatever he focuses on raises sales because it is the messenger that's delivering it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is something that is used by marketers. I think there are opportunities to use it more, but maybe where the behavioral science bit gets interesting is not just that you should look for someone else to sing your praises. There's also arguments about what type of messenger works really well. And there seem to be three broad areas. You want your messenger to be credible, neutral, or relatable. I mean, ideally all three, but that's quite hard. But if your messenger can have one of those attributes, it tends to make what they say more persuasive. So in the Hovland and Weiss experiment, it was really about credibility. If you got an expert, someone who had knowledge about a particular area, to make an argument, the same facts would be given more weight. But there are other tactics that can be used to get as much influence.
Remind everybody again, the three areas. It was
credibility. So this is, you are an expert in that area. Relatability. The messenger is someone like me. And neutrality. In the case of Oatly, it's not Oatly saying they're amazing. It's a barista. It's not Oatly saying that they taste wonderful. It's someone who doesn't have a financial gain who puts in that point.
So, Richard, between those three different areas, is there any one that is more important? Any connection between those three that we can really learn more about?
Yeah, the ideal would be to cover off the three attributes, but there is evidence behind each one of the attributes. So there's an amazing academic writer called Steve Martin. And in 2019, he came out with a book called Messengers, which is all about the messenger effect. And in that, he talks a lot about neutrality. That if Oatly say they're amazing, people will discount their argument very strongly.
Because they have a perception that, of course, they would say they're great to their benefit.
Yeah. I mean, they're going to say this stuff tastes amazing, it's healthy, it's good for the environment because their profit depends on it. People aren't stupid. I mean, consumers know this and therefore they are skeptical. So Martin looked at neutrality as one of the attributes that makes for a strong messenger. So he talks about an experiment he did in Britain with some real estate agents. And what those real estate agents used to do is the receptionist would get a call from a potential customer. The receptionist would put them through to a salesperson, and then the salesperson would say, "Hi, my name's Peter. I've got 20 years experience and I'm brilliant." What Martin suggested they do to harness the messenger effect is to get the receptionist to give the initial spiel about the salesperson. So the receptionist would say, "Okay, I'm going to put you through to Peter. He's got 20 years experience. He's brilliant for these reasons." Now, the information that the caller was receiving did not change, but it came from someone who was one step removed from self-interest. And what they found is the conversion rate, so people actually going out to see houses, went up by 20% with this new tactic, and actual contracts and sales of houses went up by 15%.
Amazing.
So that, I think, is a fascinating area. One, because it proves this value of neutrality. But maybe secondly, is it shows you how low the benchmark is for neutrality. Remember, this was still a receptionist employed by the real estate agency who was giving the praise for the salesperson. They still have a vested interest. It's just a little bit removed from being completely self-interested. And I think that should give brands a lot of hope because it suggests that if you get an influencer to sing your praises, even if people kind of know they're probably being paid money, it's still a little bit of distance from the brand singing its own praises. Even that small amount of neutrality, even that step towards independence, that gives it more credibility.
To me, what we're showing is that this messenger effect can be coordinated. You give the example of using an influencer, but even in customer service or even in a brand communications, one step removed can be coordinated and can help. Feels like to me, this is why social proof is so powerful. Like to me, this feels very much like the messenger effect is leveraging some of the same insights as why social proof works so well.
Yeah, I think you're right. So social proof argument, going back to the 1930s, hundreds of studies showing if a product appears popular, then it becomes more appealing and people are more likely to buy it. One of the reasons that might be powerful is the neutrality of the crowd. If Oatly say they're amazing, skepticism. If hundreds of people are buying Oatly, well, all those drinkers are trying to get the tastiest, best value thing they can. They are neutral, they are independent, they are, in the proper sense of the word, disinterested. And therefore, the behavior of the crowd has that neutrality. So I think you're right. There are reasons why the messenger effect and why social proof, there are similar reasons about why both are powerful.
And in the Steve Martin experiment, the receptionist connects to lots of real estate agents. So there is a perception that she would likely not say that about every person she connects to. And that's why it's more believable, because she's choosing to say it about some and not others. And of course, as a brand, we can control that message.
Yeah, and maybe it's people have a simple rule of thumb of praise from another person is more valuable than someone giving themselves praise. So what they're probably not doing, once they've got the rule in thumb in their head, is not calibrating that exactly to what is the relationship between the two parties who are praising each other. Maybe we've got this rule of thumb of give greater value to praise from other people, and then we don't calibrate that perhaps as accurately as we should. And therefore, as you say, an organization has a real opportunity here. If you have layers of different staff, make sure they are praising each other. If you're an ad agency, make sure the planner is talking up the creative is talking up the account manager is talking up the strategist. There are real simple applications here, but perhaps we don't do them enough because we think, well, we're not completely neutral. Why would anyone listen to us? But Martin gives experiments suggest otherwise.
And if it's feeling a little bit like social engineering, or maybe if it's edging on dishonesty, I think the rule still applies if you view it as through a lens of culture. You should say something positive about the person that you are passing off to, and let it be honest. This person is more trustworthy. This person's more innovative. That person's a great communicator. You can choose a positive attribute as part of the recommendation that is built in truth. And so now it's not a forced talking point. It's a truism that you are making sure gets added to increase the effect.
I think that's a very good build. This is not recommending you make stuff up. That is a short-term tactic. You're going to get caught out. You're going to damage your reputation in the long term. But presumably, if you have a colleague, there's something about them that you can say that's positive. If there isn't, then there are much, much bigger problems than behavioral science consultant, but you should not have that person working there. Maybe it's their experience level. Maybe it's their knowledge of the local area. Maybe it's their friendliness. There's got to be something from all the different characteristics the person has that you can focus on. It's about picking that positive, genuine, truthful insight, not making one up.
Mm-hmm. And as you jump to brand marketing, it seems so often brands make the mistake of, we're going to get 10 influencers and they're all going to feature how great tasting product X is, versus letting the influencer choose their authentic attribute that really connects with them. It will be much more believable and much more effective if they choose the positive attribute to call out amongst a list of approved brand attributes, should you so choose, or to give them free rein one way or another. I think it would be, the studies show as long as you get that positive attribute, the messenger effect is working. But if you can give them that honesty, it will only be that much better and more believable.
Yeah, that's great idea. Great idea.
So what other elements exist that would make a really powerful messenger effect?
We talked about credibility with the Hovland study, neutrality with the Steve Martin study. The third one is similarity. So relatability. I am most influenced by people like myself. That's the argument. So born in Essex, now live in South London, I am more likely to be influenced by seeing what other South Londoners do or other people from Essex, what they do, than the population as a whole. That would be the argument here. A messenger who I can relate to is going to be more powerful. And what's interesting is the relatability of someone is a kind of malleable attribute. So talk about a study that shows the power of similarity and then how that what we associate with changes. There's a wonderful 2005 study from Levine, who's at the University of Lancaster. And this is a very British study. It's about soccer, or as we say, football. He gets a group of Man United fans. So you're not into football or soccer. This is a massive club, one of the most famous clubs in Britain. It's a group of Man United fans, talks to them and says, look, you're going to be taking part in an experiment. The experiment's going to be conducted in a whole other side of the campus, and you're going to be watching Man United games and looking for the number of fouls, with something like that. People then sent on their way towards the hall where this supposed experiment's going to take place. And then as they're on their way, a jogger runs past, falls over, and the key of the experiment is, does the Man United fan go and help that jogger? Now, sometimes the jogger is dressed in a Man United soccer shirt. Sometimes they're wearing a Liverpool shirt. So Liverpool are the arch rivals, Manchester United. And what they find is that if the jogger's in a Man United shirt, 92% of the participants help. If they're in a Liverpool shirt, that number drops to 30%.
Shocking.
Yeah, they are deeply influenced by whether or not they think people are in the same in-group as themselves. The interesting bit, though, is they then do a follow-up study, the psychologists. So Levine gets another group of Man United fans in. But when he's talking to them in his original discussion, he says loads of studies into football are about the negatives, the hooliganism, all the problems that come with being a football fan. But what we want to do is do a study about the positive aspect of being a football fan. So everything he's talking about is not club related. It's about this broader identity of being a soccer fan. That group, or that, then head off towards the supposed venue where they're going to take part in the experiment. They then see this jogger fall over, sometimes wearing a Man United top, sometimes wearing a Liverpool top. But now we get quite a different pattern of helping. 80% of joggers wearing a Man United top are helped. 70% of Liverpool fans are helped. So suddenly, what people are relating to is no longer this really tiny identity piece of club. Now it's about we have a shared sporting interest. So where we see relatability and similarity, that can be changed. Now, we all have multiple aspects to our identity. And British, I'm also a lover of behavioural science, I'm a lover of coffee, I'm a lover of running. We all have to have different aspects. And I guess what you need to do if you want to persuade people is identify, if you're in a one-to-one situation, where some of those identity attributes overlap. Make sure you're focusing on those areas of similarity, not the things that divide us.
This is why in the opening you said it's so malleable, because it can change so easily from seeing myself as just a Man United fan and not a Liverpool fan to we are all football fans, soccer fans, or not. What's impactful to me, Richard, is how recency changes the action. I mean, so quickly they go from hearing talks about either they're only about Man United versus it's about all of us as football fans to that then changing an action so quickly. Any thoughts on like how the recency of the message changes the action?
Yeah, I think it's this element of we all contain multitudes, and where we choose to, what aspect of ourselves we choose to pay attention to, that changes. Now, you can't tell me I'm French, right, or 25, or a lover of Russian poetry. But of all those things that I said I'm interested in, they're not all equally salient at the same time. You can move where I'm paying attention to the existing attributes. And I think that's the opportunity. You can't create a new passion out of thin air, but you can change where I pay attention.
It makes you think the application in brand marketing is using a 30-second commercial to bring the saliency of that part of your identity and then activating on it, or using contextual marketing to have people thinking about being a good parent and then activating against that. It gives you a pretty wide creative berth to say, how can we bring the saliency of that identity to the forefront of the mind? And then how can we get an action to get a behavior because of that identity saliency?
Yeah, the other one that sprang to mind is, I think earlier on in the podcast, you talked about some of the pharma advertising. They will build associations with key opinion leaders. So yeah, a giant pharma company, they will think, well, who is the most influential key opinion leader in, let's say, the world of kidney health? And they'll put lots of money to get that association. The argument about relatability and similarity would be, well, actually, there's a different angle you could take. Rather than having one world-renowned experts, what you might want to do is have a roster of 10 less well-known key opinion leaders, but maybe one is from Arizona, one's Washington. You use the Arizona one to talk to people in Arizona, the Washington one to talk to people in Washington. Or they have different sub-areas within the kind of kidney field of which they are expert. And then you match the opinion leader to the target that you're talking to. So it's a different angle to try and build up that persuasive power for your messenger.
And what you choose to do may be based in what your brand realities are. You may simply not be able to afford the leading key opinion leader in your field. And so this is a way to use key opinion leaders for less cost or to different effect. If you're targeting, let's say one type of racial group or one type of interest group, and your key opinion leader does not have any relevancy to them other than being an expert in kidney function, there may be a better way to reach them with more connection by using thought leaders that better match your audience that you're going after.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think often when we are thinking who could be the messenger for our brand, people gravitate towards credibility first of all. What's interesting about relatability is it gives you, this completely different set of tactics to get a very powerful messenger. Absolutely.
So, Richard, this gives us a lot to think about in these three areas of how to choose the right messenger. But maybe there's some elements that people are less willing to admit to themselves, and maybe we're less willing to think about as marketers that will affect the effectiveness of the messengers we choose.
So I think you're absolutely right. There are certain aspects of a messenger that people will not admit influences them. So there's a famous study, brilliantly anarchic study from 1968 by Dubin Gross. And for their study, they drive a car to a traffic light. When that traffic light turns green, they purposely stall the car for a few seconds and they wait to see whether or not the car behind them starts honking the horn. The twist in the experiment is sometimes they're driving a super high-end car. Like, I was going to say a BMW, but they probably didn't have BMWs in the 1968. But sometimes it's a super high-end car. Other times it's a barely roadworthy car. It looks like a real beat-up car.
Junker, yeah.
Yeah. And what they find is if they are driving a cheap, low-status car, they get beat whole 84% of the time, whereas if it's a high-status car, they're only beat 50% of the time. Now, what's then interesting is they go and get a new group of people, they tell them about the experiment, and they say to them, would you change whether you beat a stall car based on the expense of that car? Everyone, virtually everyone, denies that status, wealth have any effect on them at all. But of course, we know, the psychologists and behavioral scientists, that what people say influences them, and what actually influences them, completely different things. And unfortunately, status is an area where people are loath to admit it influences them, but studies like Dubin Gross and many others completed since suggest that can be a big influence as well.
And so as we think about this study, it reveals a few things that we've talked about in multiple episodes. One thing for sure is we cannot ask buyers, we cannot ask customers what it is that they will do and assume that that is what they're actually going to do, because they either don't know or they're loath to admit their real motivation. So that's kind of number one. But number two, that we can use studies like this to really directly influence the way we do brand marketing. So we know that people not only are going to have something like status affect their actions, but they're also going to not admit that that's the driver of their actions. And when you and I were talking in the pre-show, we were talking a little bit about how brands can choose different types of key opinion leaders or different types of famous folks to represent them. And you can almost make the choice of a celebrity or a key opinion leader based on status, neutrality, and relatability. And you and I were saying, should you choose a musician? Should you choose a sports star? Or should you choose an actor? And how do you make that decision of a celebrity endorsement based on status, neutrality, and relatability? Through a lot of celebrity endorsement deals that I've done, we've found that actors almost always are more effective. And I wonder if it's not because they are eminently more relatable because of their roles as actors. They take on different personalities to be more relatable. And generally, they are not a part of a winning team or a losing team, a Manchester United versus a Liverpool. So they just naturally appear more neutral. I wonder what comes to mind as we talk about choosing celebrities and potentially deciding them based on these three factors.
I think you're right, because there is a real problem of how do you get status and relatability? They're kind of in contradiction. If you are a super famous musician, you've got status, but it's hard to relate to Jay-Z or Coldplay or whoever. The amazing thing with actor is they have status. Tom Hanks has status because he is one of the world's most famous actors. He's a Hollywood success. But there's also, I think, relatability because of the parts that he adopts. And sometimes we conflate Tom Hanks and the characters that he plays. So there's a rare opportunity, I think, with an actor or actress to get both status and relatability. So I think that absolutely backs up your point about maybe they are the ideal vehicle to be a messenger for a brand.
So kind of 2 points here. One, if you're choosing a celebrity endorsement or a key opinion leader, think about how the messenger affects relatability, neutrality, and status. That's number one. And number two, just as we're riffing, potentially actors are better messengers, are better able to take advantage of the benefits of the messenger effect than, let's say, musicians or sports stars, because they better match those three standards.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as we come to a close today, Richard, would you mind doing a recap of the big topics we've discussed?
Yeah. So probably three key points. We've talked about the messenger effect in general, this is the idea that who says something can be as important as what is said. And remember that Hovland and Weiss study with the questions about the nuclear-powered submarine. So brands should be thinking not just what they say, but who can articulate the argument for why they're amazing. That's the first point. And then the second point is that there are predictable characteristics that make for a persuasive messenger. And actually, I think we've covered 4. Neutrality, credibility, relatability, and status. And then our third and final point was, if you are trying to work out which of these attributes is right for you as a brand, be very careful about how you do your research. People will not be open about what genuinely motivates them. Sometimes they lie, sometimes they just don't know. So direct questioning can send you off in the wrong direction. People will explain their behavior as if they were fully considered rational decision makers. They will downplay some of these simple shortcuts that we've been discussing, which are actually very influential in decision making.
Thank you for wrapping on today's episode, Richard. As we come to a close, we always have a fun question. What is the way Richard Shotton takes his caffeine? Is it coffee? Is it tea? If it is one of those, how do you make it? What's your caffeinated beverage of choice?
Definitely preference for a coffee, and there's no way I'm going near oat milk or soy milk. So
sorry, Oatly.
yeah. A little bit of skim milk and a coffee. What about you?
I went through, maybe I was just inspired by the British. I went through a phase of black tea with milk and honey, but I am now back to more American roots. That would be a skim milk latte with no sugar. And, you can really, when it's made well, it can really be quite delicious.
Well, I'm very glad that you're doing some tea drinking. And then, of course, as a Brit, in the evenings, when I don't want to be having a caffeine injection, then I'll turn to tea. Bit of Earl Grey, Lapsang Souchong, all very nice.
This is, of course, what we would expect. And there you have it, everyone. If today's episode sparked a new idea for you, do us a favor. Hit the follow button, leave us a review, or share this with someone who loves marketing just as much as we all do. And if you have a favorite behavioral science principle or example of something that you see working well in the market, let us know, and we might feature it in an upcoming episode. Until next time, I'm Michael Aaron Flicker.
And I'm Richard Shotton.
Behavioral Science for Brands is brought to you by Method One. Recognized as one of the fastest growing companies in America for the 3rd year in a row, featured on Inc.'s 5,000 list. Method One is a proudly independent creative and media agency grounded in behavioral science. They exist to make brands irresistible, helping people discover products, services, and experiences that bring moments of joy to their lives. As behavior change experts, Method One creates emotional connections that drive true brand value for their clients, focusing primarily with indulgence brands in the CPG space. Find out more at methodone.com.